It is April 1945 and high over Germany. The metal-on-metal scream of an aerial battle is underway. The war is in its final brutal stage, and the skies are a stage for a clash of philosophies, a collision of technological evolution. In one corner, we have the undisputed champion of propeller-driven aircraft, the P-51D Mustang, a true workhorse. It was the pinnacle of established, trusted technology, powered by the mighty Packard Merlin engine. This beast of an engine gave the Mustang a top speed of 440 miles per hour, a respectable and deadly speed for the time. But speed wasn't its only weapon. What made the Mustang a true game-changer was its range, its reach. With its external tanks, the P-51D had the capacity to escort American bombers all the way to Berlin and, crucially, all the way back. Before the Mustang, bomber crews had to face the terrifying prospect of crossing into Germany's heartland, undefended once their short-range escorts ran out of fuel. The Mustang ended that. The training manual of the time, aptly called the Long Reach, had a simple, unwavering mantra: where the bombers go to bomb, the fighters go to protect them. The Mustang was the aerial shepherd, the protector, the guardian of the bomber stream. They were masters of the skies until the other machine appeared. The ghost in the sky. Enter the Me-262 Schwalbe. In the other corner, the German war machine had produced something truly revolutionary, a technological marvel that seemed to leapfrog a generation of aviation. The Me-262, the Schwalbe, or Swallow. This was the unmistakable dawn of the jet age. The twin-engine Me-262 was the Luftwaffe's desperate answer to the continuous, relentless bombing raids that were tearing the industrial heart out of Germany. It was a machine of sheer, unadulterated speed. The 262 could reach well over 600 miles per hour in a dive, a speed that left its propeller-driven contemporaries in the dust. It could also climb at an incredible 10 meters per second. The experience of flying this futuristic weapon was almost spiritual. General Major Adolf Galland, a German ace, described it in a way that truly captures the feeling of its power, saying it felt as if angels were pushing the aircraft. Armed with 4 powerful 30mm cannons and up to 24 rockets, it also had the destructive power needed to wreak havoc in the heavens. Their tactic was terrifyingly simple and effective. They would come in on a fast, supersonic-like dive, inflict their devastating firepower on the slow-moving bomber formations, and get clean away before the escorting fighters even had a chance to intercept. They were ghosts. They were phantoms. They were untouchable. If the P-51s did manage to intercept, they were forced to take desperate measures, immediately dropping their external fuel tanks to give them any chance of matching the jet's acceleration. This meant that, irrespective of the outcome of the chase, with minimal fuel, the Mustangs would be forced to turn for home, leaving the bombers undefended for the rest of the German fighters to pick off. It was a no-win scenario. The new offensive, destroying the threat. The tide of battle began to shift because the Allied High Command realized they couldn't just play defense anymore. The P-51s couldn't catch the 262s, so a new directive was issued. From 1944, it was stated that the first duty of the 8th Air Force fighters was no longer to bring the bombers back alive, but instead was to destroy German fighters. This led the P-51s to roam more offensively, seeking out the German airfields where the jets were most vulnerable during takeoff and landing, and patrolling the skies more aggressively. This new offensive mindset also led to some of the most incredible head-to-head engagements of P-51s versus Me-262s. The jet was fast, but it wasn't invisible. A pilot's story, the ultimate dogfight. We can best understand this clash through the eyes of the pilots who lived it. Let's turn the clock to April the 10th, 1945. Over 1,200 bombers and 900 fighters from the 8th Air Force were over Germany. Lieutenant Walter Schuck, a highly decorated Luftwaffe ace, was in one of 2 Me-262s from JG-7 sent to intercept. He describes the engagement with the cool clarity of a man who has faced death countless times. We received no instructions from the ground when airborne. Our task was merely to engage bombers over Berlin, he began. Once above cloud, at about 5,000 meters, I could see the bomber formation. Clearly, at about 6,000 meters, I was flying about 550 kilometers per hour in a slight climb after them. Everything seemed to be going fine. In 3 to 4 minutes, we would be with the bombers. Then, the experience of a seasoned fighter pilot took over. Then, as an experienced fighter pilot, I had the old tingling in the back of the neck, feeling that perhaps enemy fighters were about. I had a good look around, and in front and above, I saw 6 Mustangs passing above me from almost head-on. At first, he thought he'd been missed. I thought they had not seen me, and so I continued on. But just to be on the safe side, I glanced back one more, and it was a good thing for me that I did. Because at that moment, I saw the Mustangs diving down and curving round onto the pair of us. With the speed of their dive and the speed we had lost because of our climb, they stood a good chance of catching us. Then they opened fire, and tracer began to flash disconcertingly close to our aircraft. Chuck's only hope was speed. I opened my throttle fully and put my nose down a little to increase my own speed and resolved to outrun the enemy fighters. I did not attempt to throw them off of their aim. I knew the moment I turned, my speed would fall, and then they would have me. He called to his wingman, the Feldwebel, to keep going. But in a moment of panic, his companion made the fatal mistake. He became scared because I noticed him weaving from side to side. Then he turned away to the left. It was just what the Mustang pilots wanted, and in no time they had broken off from me and were on to him. His aircraft received several hits, and I saw it go down and crash. My companion was unable to bail out. Chuck had survived, but was enraged. I kept an eye on the enemy fighters at 4,000 meters and watched them reform and turn around to fly westwards for home. Feeling vengeful, I decided to have a go at them. He rapidly closed in on them from behind, his jet engine screaming. But the Mustangs were expertly piloted. At a range of about 500 meters, the Mustang leader started rocking his wings, and I knew that I had been seen. A moment of pure adrenaline and intense calculation followed. If I continued, I knew that the enemy fighters would probably split up into 2 and curve round from either side onto my tail. So I resolved to strike first. I loosed off all 24 of the R4M rockets under my wings, straight at the enemy fighters. His audacious move paid off, and I was very lucky. I hit 2 of them, and they went down out of control. This time, I had plenty of speed and had little trouble in avoiding the fire from their companions. Final desperation and legacy, but the fight wasn't over. Almost out of fuel, Chuck was coming in to land at the Curtin airfield, one of the most dangerous moments for a jet. He was targeted again by P-51s. Forced to put his plane in a tight, curving approach, the Mustang scattered, assuming he was coming in for an attack. He managed to quickly put the bird down before the Mustangs started strafing the airfield. His account ends with a sigh of relief and a nod to the ground crews. Fortunately for me, the flak defenses were still on their toes and I was not hit. By early May 1945, the Allies owned the skies completely, and the last few Me-262s sat waiting on the runways, awaiting capture from the Allied ground troops. The jet's revolutionary technology was about to be studied and used in the upcoming Cold War, leading to the next great leap in aerial combat. The clash between the P-51 Mustang and the Me-262 wasn't just a series of dogfights. It was a fleeting, spectacular moment where 2 eras of aviation met in a deadly embrace. The P-51 was the perfection of the past, and the Me-262 was the undeniable promise of the future. The jet won the technological race, but the Mustang won the war. The hunter and the hunted. P-51 tactics. The Me-262's speed advantage was undeniably game-changing, but the Allied pilots, particularly those flying the Mustangs, were not easily defeated. They were veterans of years of air combat and adapted their tactics to meet this monstrous new threat. The key was to never engage the jet on its own terms. The speed of the Me-262 made a traditional dogfight, a close-in turning battle, suicidal for a P-51 pilot. A Mustang attempting to turn sharply would rapidly lose the speed it needed to survive, becoming a sitting duck for the jet's powerful 30mm cannons. So they stopped trying to turn with them. Instead, the P-51 pilots relied on what they had: superior maneuverability at lower speeds, better fuel economy, and perhaps most importantly, numbers. The jet pilots were alone. The Mustangs always came in swarms. The most successful tactic became one of ambush. The Mustangs would operate at high altitude, using the thin air to their advantage for maximum speed when diving. They would patrol the skies around known jet airfields, knowing that the Me-262 was extremely vulnerable during its takeoff and landing phases. Why? The Me-262's early jet engines took a significant amount of time to spool up to full power. As it approached the runway, the pilot had to reduce throttle to manage the approach speed. If attacked at this moment, the jet pilot could not simply punch the throttle and accelerate away. There was a dangerous lag, a crucial window of vulnerability. For several critical seconds, the Me-262 was nothing more than a fast-moving, lightly armored target. P-51 pilots would often wait, high above, sometimes hidden in the sun or clouds, until an Me-262 started its landing approach. Then they would dive at full speed, guns blazing, hoping to catch the jet before it could touch down or accelerate to a safe altitude after takeoff. This was not a gentleman's aerial duel. This was cold, calculating murder in the air, but it was effective. Technical marvels and fatal flaws. While the P-51 represented the peak of propeller technology, its success relied on reliability and endurance. The Packard Merlin engine was a marvel of piston engineering, capable of long, sustained flights at high power. The Mustang's airframe was simple to maintain and easy to repair. It was a reliable, consistent killer. The Me-262, on the other hand, was an entirely different beast. Its Jumo 004 axial flow turbojet engines were the embodiment of innovation. They produced a terrifying roar and astonishing speed. But they also had fatal flaws. Firstly, the engines had a notoriously short service life, often lasting only 10 to 25 hours before requiring a major overhaul or replacement. This was a logistical nightmare for the already struggling German war economy. The constant shortage of critical, high-quality, heat-resistant alloys meant the jets were built from materials that simply couldn't withstand the intense heat of sustained jet operation. Secondly, the handling of the throttle was tricky and dangerous. Pushing the throttle too quickly could cause the engine to rapidly overheat, surging and potentially exploding. Jet pilots had to be incredibly gentle with their power controls, a demand that was often impossible to meet in the chaos of a dogfight. This difficulty contributed directly to their vulnerability during the critical phases of takeoff and landing. The 262 was a glimpse into the future, but it was a fragile one. It traded reliability and longevity for spectacular performance, a trade-off Germany could ill afford in 1945. The rockets and the bombers. The greatest threat the Me-262 posed was not to the Mustang, but to the slow, vulnerable formations of Allied bombers. A key component of the jet's destructive power was the R-4M rocket, R-4M Antel, mantle, or shroud. The R-4M was an unguided, small-caliber, air-to-air rocket. The Me-262 could carry up to 24 of these rockets mounted beneath its wings. They were designed to be fired in a single, devastating salvo. The idea was simple. Fire the entire group of rockets into the bomber formation, destroying or crippling multiple aircraft with a single pass, without having to get close enough to be threatened by the bomber's defensive machine guns. The blast radius of the R-4M was large enough that a single near miss could obliterate the thin skin of a bomber. While Lieutenant Schuck's engagement saw him use them against fighters, their primary role was as a bomber killer. For the bomber crews, the men inside the B-17 Flying Fortresses and the B-24 Liberators, the sight of an Me-262 coming in was horrifying. The jet's speed meant they had almost no time to react. The jet would appear as a blur. The whoosh of the rockets would pass, and then the explosions would erupt within the formation. This sheer psychological terror added another layer to the Me-262's impact on the war. The Allied response to this rocket threat was twofold: tighter formation, flying for mutual defense, and the Mustang's renewed dedication to destroying the jets on the ground and in the air. The long-range fighter escort became not just a protector, but a hunter. The human element, aces and tactics. The story of the P-51 versus the Me-262 is as much about the men as the machines. Both sides produced dedicated, skilled pilots who took these cutting-edge machines to their limits. On the American side, Mustang pilots like Colonel Clarence Bud Anderson became legends. Their aggressive search and destroy missions against the German airfields were key to minimizing the jet threat. They mastered the art of high-speed diving and quick reaction teamwork, turning the jet's advantage of speed into a trap during landing. On the German side, the jet pilots were often the last hope of the Luftwaffe. Pilots like Adolf Galland and Heinrich Baer were veterans who, despite the overwhelming odds, used the 262 to rack up impressive, if ultimately pointless, scores. They were often tasked with defending Germany's most critical industrial centers, knowing they were outnumbered, outsupplied, and flying an aircraft with a built-in time limit due to engine life. The psychological warfare was also intense. The Mustang pilots learned that a jet pilot, once engaged, would almost always try to run for home. The only reliable defense for the jet was its speed, meaning they avoided turning in close-quarters combat at all costs. This knowledge allowed the Mustang pilots to predict the jet's actions. They knew where the jets would run, and they set up kill zones along the expected retreat paths. The Allied pilots understood that while the jet was faster, the Mustang was tougher and could sustain damage better. It was the right tool for the job of sustained air superiority, even if it lacked the raw speed of its opponent. The legacy, a new era. The war ended before the Me-262 could be mass-produced in numbers large enough to truly turn the tide. Had the jet arrived a year earlier, or had it been allowed to be deployed as a pure fighter, Hitler initially insisted it be used as a bomber, the impact could have been catastrophic for the Allied air campaign. As it was, the P-51 Mustangs, by their superior numbers, logistical endurance, and the adaptability of their pilots, managed to contain and neutralize the jet threat. They forced the Me-262 into an increasingly desperate defensive role until the collapse of the Third Reich. The technological lessons, however, were not lost. The captured Me-262s and their engine technology were immediately shipped back to the United States, Britain, and the Soviet Union. These were not mere trophies. They were blueprints for the future. The jet technology of the Me-262 directly influenced the design of the first generation of post-war fighters, including the F-86 Sabre and the MiG-15. The P-51 Mustang represented the glorious final chapter of the propeller-driven fighter. The Me-262 represented the bold first sentence of the jet age. Their clashes in the final, desperate months of World War II were the ultimate proving ground, a historic collision that laid the foundation for virtually all modern aerial combat. The era of the jet fighter had begun. The logistical nightmare, German struggles. While the Me-262 was a technological marvel, its effectiveness was crippled not just by Allied tactics, but by the sheer collapse of the German war economy and its logistical support structure. The production of the Jumo 004 engine was a logistical nightmare from the start. Jet engines required highly specialized, heat-resistant alloys containing metals like nickel and chromium. As the war ground on and the Allied bombing campaign systematically destroyed Germany's supply lines and processing plants, these critical materials became extremely scarce. The German engineers were forced to substitute inferior materials, leading directly to the catastrophically short lifespan of the engines, sometimes only lasting 10 hours. This meant that for every hour of flight, 2 or more hours of intense, costly, and resource-draining maintenance were required. Fuel was another major constraint. The Me-262 required a specialized type of fuel, generally a synthetic type due to Germany's lack of natural oil reserves. The constant bombing of synthetic fuel plants left the Luftwaffe desperately short. By 1945, there simply wasn't enough high-quality fuel to keep the limited number of jets flying. Even when they were technically airworthy, many Me-262s were grounded because they were starved of fuel. Adding to the chaos, the Allied bombing focused relentlessly on the infrastructure needed to support the jets. The dedicated airfields, the maintenance hangars, the training schools, all became priority targets. The Mustang pilots didn't just target the jets in the air. They targeted the system that supported them on the ground. This systematic destruction meant that the few jets that survived aerial combat were often destroyed while being serviced or waiting on the tarmac. The Me-262 was a symbol of German ingenuity, but it was also a perfect example of a weapon that was simply too late and too demanding for the nation's shattered resources. The complexity of the jet engine and its material requirements far outstripped Germany's ability to sustain it under such intense pressure. Duel of the Generals: Politics versus Performance. The Me-262's deployment was also heavily influenced and arguably hampered by internal political meddling. The jet was conceived and designed as a fighter, a swift interceptor designed solely to destroy incoming bombers. However, Adolf Hitler, obsessed with his concept of a swift retaliatory strike, repeatedly intervened and insisted the Me-262 be developed primarily as a high-speed bomber, the Blitzbomber. This decision was a devastating setback,